The Gemara. As you know, we were discussing the question of Beis Shammai, whether he holds that you need a kosher. Do you need to have a cup of wine for Birkat Hamazon? That was a discussion of the Gemara. So now we're on Nun Beis Amud Aleph 52a. We'll go back to that point. The Savri Beis Shammai is before the wide lines, about 8 lines before the wide lines. The Savri Beis Shammai, Birkat Hamazon Tunakos. It seems that we learned in the Braita, that Beis Shammai says if a guy comes home Saturday night and he only has 1 cup of wine and he comes home Saturday night, so we say, what is he supposed to do? He says he's going to go ahead and use that cup of wine both for Havdalah and both for Birkat Hamazon. We're going to say he's going to delay the Havdalah until after he eats because of the importance, because he needs to have a cup of wine for the Birkat Hamazon. If he says Havdalah right away and he uses up the cup of wine, he doesn't have a cup of wine for Havdalah. So the Gemara says, "V'sabri Beis Shammai Birkat Hamazon Tunakos." Birkat Hamazon requires a cup, but it's not. We learned it in our Mishnah. V'olahem yayin la'achar Hamazon. If the wine came to the people after the main course, he got wine after the main course. Now, what is it supposed to? Is he allowed to drink the wine after the main course? He didn't do Birkat Hamazon. Could he just drink the wine? If he drinks the wine, so then he's not going to have anything left for Birkat Hamazon. So we have a machlok of Beis Shammai Beis Hillel. Beis Shammai says, no problem, drink the wine. If you drink the wine, you're not going to have anything left for Birkat Hamazon. So we see Beis Shammai does not require you to have a cup of wine for Birkat Hamazon. So it says, Beis Shammai says you say a bor prei gefen, and then you say the Birkat, then you say Birkat Hamazon. The Gemara understands you're going to go ahead and you're going to have the wine before Birkat Hamazon. So my love is probably you say a bracha and you drink, because if you're going to say a bracha, if you're not going to drink, it's going to be, how can you say a bracha without drinking? And if so, it will be a hefsek. So if it says you say a bracha and then you say Birkat Hamazon, and then the Gemara also understands that you can't just say a bracha and then say a bracha on the wine and then say Birkat Hamazon, because then Birkat Hamazon will be an interruption between the bracha and the wine, right? If I say let's say Kiddush Friday night, I say Kiddush, I say Geffen, and then I say Geffen first, and then I say the bracha about Shabbat. But the bracha Shabbat will not interrupt. The bracha on Shabbat will not be considered an interruption, because Shabbat, because that's what I'm saying, Kiddush, the wine is coming to sanctify the new day. So I could talk about Shabbat after I mention the bracha bor prei gefen. I could talk about Shabbat. It's not a hefsek. Also at a wedding, right? You have sheva brachot at a wedding on the chuppah. But you say a bor prei gefen, and then you say 6 other brachot, and then you finally drink from the wine. But since they're all connected, all the brachot are coming because you have the wine. The wine is coming because of the brachot. So therefore, we don't look at it as an interruption. But Birkat Hamazon means I am not eating anymore. I'm not drinking anymore. So that would be considered an interruption. So therefore, what does it mean that I make a bracha and then I say Birkat Hamazon? So I make a bracha on the wine, I drink it, and then I do Birkat Hamazon. I don't have a cup of wine. Who says no? The Gemara says no. The mevarach ala manechle. You say a bracha on the wine, but you leave it. You say bracha on the wine, and you leave it there. So the Gemara said, what do you mean? How could that be? How can you say a bracha on the wine and just leave it there? It's a bracha in vain. You can't just say a bracha without tasting. So if you don't, if you say a bracha, you have to go ahead and taste from the wine. So the Gemara says, you know what he meant? What he meant was, when he said that he made a bracha and he put it down, of course he never meant he said a blessing without drinking. He means the time late. You said a bracha, and you tasted a little. After you said the bracha, you tasted a little of the wine, and maybe it honors the meal that you had some wine by the meal. But on Shabbat is a mitzvah to have wine during the meal. So maybe by tasting something, you're showing some honor to the meal. Or maybe the guy wants some wine after he drank. He had a nice meal. He wants a little wine. So we tell him, so you know what? You want a little wine, so don't drink the whole thing up. Have a little bit of the wine. Taste a little bit of wine. Say a blessing. Taste a little bit, and leave the rest for the Birkat HaMazon. Because you require a cup for Birkat HaMazon. If the Shammai really holds, the Gemara is saying perhaps that there's no contradiction. As the Shammai holds, you definitely need to have a cup of wine for Birkat HaMazon. Right? We spoke about this machloket. When you say Birkat HaMazon, do you need to say Birkat HaMazon over a cup of wine? So the Gemara says, V'amar ma, tamo pagomo. What do you mean that he's going to use this cup of wine for Birkat HaMazon? The rabbi said, if you taste from the wine, then you ruin the wine. We spoke about that last week or 2 weeks ago, that when you taste from the wine, the cup that you drank from, if you drink from the cup directly, that's going to, now you can't use that. You can't use that wine for Birkat HaMazon because you put your mouth on that wine. You would have to fix it. You would have to add water or add wine to it. So the Gemara says, the Tamle Biyadeh, like let's say you didn't taste it with your mouth. Let's say you say a bracha bar pre gefen, and then you poured some in your either a cup or you poured some in your hand. Your hand, used your hand as the cup. Took a little bit and you tasted from and you had clean hands. You had to wash your hands, nice. You kept your hands nice and clean, and then you tasted it. You tasted it with pouring some into your hand. And therefore, since your mouth did not go onto the cup of wine, so the cup of wine did not get ruined to be used for Birkat HaMazon. V'hamama, you know what? If you tell the case of the Breita, or the case of the Mishnah says that you only had one cup of wine. So if you only had one cup of wine, so how could you tell if you're going to taste it with your hand? That means you drank some of the cup of wine, so you're not left with the proper shear. It means to say over a cup of wine. A cup of wine requires a certain minimum amount of ounces. You have to have a minimum, let's say around 3 ounces in a cup of wine in order for you to go ahead and say kiddush. I mean, we say Friday night. Rabbi Feinstein says they should have around 4.5 ounces Friday night. He's more strict that the wine, the size of the cup, should contain 4.5 ounces, and on Shabbat day it could be 3 ounces. We're more lenient Shabbat day than Friday night, because the kiddush Friday night is a kiddush min haTorah. It's a biblical kiddush, and we're more strict on since there are other opinions that say you need a larger size, so we'll be more strict Friday night. But kiddush Shabbat day or kiddush on Pesach, at the night of Pesach, it's rabbinic, and therefore on Pesach, you only need to have 3 ounces according to Rabbi Feinstein, the size of the cup of wine. However, if Pesach comes out, if Pesach comes out on Shabbat, Friday night, then the first cup of wine would have to be 4.5 ounces. If Pesach falls out on a Friday night, for the first cup of wine, because of the kiddush of Shabbat. The first cup of wine on Pesach, if it comes out on Shabbat, it's not only for Pesach, it also serves for kiddush and Shabbat. And therefore, the kiddush of Shabbat, we're more strict for the size of the cup. So the Gemara's question is, but you don't have the size. If you drank some of it, you don't have the shear, you need a certain amount. Even though you don't technically, I mean, ideally, even though if, let's say, a cup, let's say, needs 3 ounces for Birkat HaMazon, or let's say Shabbat day, it should contain around 3 ounces. It's ideal to drink the whole cup. Of course, you give to the members, drink the whole cup, but you should try to drink at least, if you can't drink the whole cup, it's definitely good to drink a reviyit, 3/4 of the, majority of the cup, and if not majority of the cup, then drink just, 1.5 ounces, that's like majority of a reviyit. That also, good morning, Simon. Good to see you. Good year. So you drink a majority of the revi'it, drink 1.5 ounces, and that also would be good. So the Gemara says, "V'ama ma kosher bracha sarol shir," the certain size, and if you drank from it, you only have 1 cup, and you drank from it, you're not going to have left a sufficient amount. If pachas le mishure, it's less from the shir. So the Gemara says, "The nafish le tvei mishure." What happened was you had 1 cup of wine, you had more than 3 ounces, but it did not. You had a cup, you had an amount to fill 1 cup, but and therefore you could drink it more than the 3 ounces, so you could taste a little bit. Let's say you had 4 ounces, and it's Shabbat day, or let's say here we're talking about Birkat Hamazon, and you need to use this cup for Birkat Hamazon, and let's say it had 4 ounces, so you could taste 1 ounce for after the meal. You wanted to have a little wine, taste 1 ounce, and leave 3 ounces to do Birkat Hamazon over a cup of wine that has 3 ounces. So the Gemara says, "Im ein sham ela oto kos ktani." We learned if you only have that cup. We learned if you only have that cup of wine, then this is what you need to do. This is the procedure you need to do if you only have 1 cup of wine. So what do you mean to say you have more than the share, more than the amount? You don't have. If you only have 1 cup, that means you don't have more. So what do you mean you have more? The Gemara answers beautifully. I have 1 cup. I have more than 1 cup, or less than 2 cups. I don't have enough. I don't. Let's say I need 6. Let's say I would need generally. Let's say 6 ounces Shabbat day. I need 3 ounces for the Shabbat day kiddush, and 3 ounces for the Birkat Hamazon. Or here we're talking about. The case is that we're talking about. Let's say I have Birkat Hamazon, right? I have the wine came after the Suda, right? I want to go ahead. I want to have a cup of wine, and let's say the average cup of wine is a 3 ounce cup. Let's say a revi'it. That's the average cup of wine. I don't have 2 revi'it. I have more than 1 revi'it, but less than 2 revi'it. So let's say if 2 revi'it is 6 ounces, I have 4 ounces. So what do I do? So that's what I do. If I have 4 ounces, I could drink 1 ounce. I'll drink 1 ounce. I'll be left with 3 ounces. And then I have 3 ounces for the Birkat Hamazon. So that's what the Gemara says. That's what it means. I only have 1 cup. I have more than 1 cup, but not enough for 2 cups. I have more than 3 ounces, but I don't have 6 ounces. So that's what the Gemara says. The Gemara says, "Va'im ein sham ela kos echad ota kos tani." So we only have 1 cup. So the Gemara says, "Trei lo have." It's not enough for 2 cups of wine. But umechad nafish. It's more than 1 cup of wine. So it's more than 1 cup of wine. So therefore, I could taste a little bit, and then after I taste a little bit, I go ahead and I leave over 3 ounces for the Birkat Hamazon." So the Gemara says. So again, at this point, we want to say that Beis Shammai would require a cup of wine for Birkat Hamazon. That's what the Gemara wants to say. There's no contradiction between the Braita and the Mishnah. Beis Shammai could be of the opinion that you must have a cup of wine for when you do the Birkat Hamazon. You have to do it over a what? Cup of wine. The same way you do Kiddush over a cup of wine, you have to do the Birkat Hamazon over a cup of wine. So the Gemara says, "V'hatani Rav Chiya." Rav Chiya taught a Braita. Rav Chiya was one of the all-stars, one of the great rabbis who was very fluent in the Braitot, in the different statements of the rabbis. It's a Braita. Braita usually are like statements that will explain and elaborate on the Mishnah. And Rav Chiya, and Rav Chiya was considered one of the great rabbis of the Braita. Whenever he quoted, any Braita that he quoted was considered very well checked and very authentic. He was very exact and precise. And if you recall, everything was done by heart. They used to learn by heart, and therefore, if things are done by heart, it's easy to make mistakes. So what did you say? Memorization. And therefore, he was the one who was always checked up to make sure the accuracy of the exact who said what, whether it says mutter, asur, patur, a chayav. He was very, very exact. And he, Tanya of Chia said over, he quoted the Braita. He has the following: Beit Shammai Omrim, Mivarech al Hayayin. He has a Shammai says you say a bracha on the wine. The ach, what? Yes.
Are we going back? I think we're repeating.
Yeah, we went back a little bit because we didn't finish this piece of Gemara.
So we're 52, right?
We're on 52. We didn't get to 52b yet.
Yeah, okay, but okay, we're going back. Okay.
We're going back in that we had started this Gemara, but then we got involved in Rosh Hashanah. So we didn't finish. That's why we wanted to complete this Gemara. So the Gemara says, "V'hatani Rav Chia." Rav Chia, what we're learning now at this point of the class. I mean, at this point we did some of the other points. Yes, other points of review. But Tani Rav Chia, but this Rav Chia learned. Beishamai omrim mevorach al hayayin v'shotehu. V'achar kach mevorach brechat hamazon. Beishamai, his recording is Beishamai says, you say a bracha on the wine, and then you drink the wine. V'achar kach mevorach, he says you drink it. V'achar kach mevorach brechat hamazon, and then you recite the brechat hamazon. So the fact that he says that you drink the wine. He says you drink the wine and then you do Birkat HaMazon. So that's pretty clear that he's not leaving the wine for Birkat HaMazon. But he says you mevarech alayin v'shotehu, and the fact that he says he drinks it, it doesn't say he tastes it. He drinks it seems to indicate that you drink, that you don't need a cup of wine for Birkat HaMazon. So now we have a contradiction. We have Rav Chia understanding in Beit Shammai that Birkat HaMazon does not require a kos, does not require a cup of wine. And from the Braita before, when a guy comes in on Motzei Shabbat, it's clear that Beit Shammai holds that you would require a cup of wine for Birkat HaMazon. And everybody in that Braita would hold you need a cup of wine for Birkat HaMazon. So we have a contradiction. What is the opinion of Beit Shammai? The Gemara wants to understand. Ella, the Gemara says, Trei Tanai Aliba de Beit Shammai. The Gemara says that there's two Tanoim, two rabbis, are arguing in what the opinion of Beit Shammai is. One rabbi says that Beit Shammai holds that Birkat HaMazon requires a cup of wine. That's the Braita that the Gemara quoted earlier, that a guy comes home Saturday night, only has one cup of wine, and he allows you to eat, and so on and so forth, and then keep that cup of wine for Birkat HaMazon and Havdalah. That Braita definitely holds, Beit Shammai holds, you need a cup of wine for Birkat HaMazon. However, our Mishnah, according to Rav Chia, our Mishnah says that according to Beit Shammai, you drink up the cup of wine, you drink the cup of wine, and then you do Birkat HaMazon. He holds you do not need to do Birkat HaMazon over a cup of wine. It's interesting. There is a discussion. Beit Shammai and Beis Hillel in the Mishnah, right? Beis Hillel says, according to Rashi, that Beis Hillel who says you saved a cup of wine, you ate a meal, and then the cup of wine is brought out, and you saved the cup of wine for Birkat HaMazon. Right? That's what Beis Hillel says. Now, the Rashba says a very interesting thing. He says that even Beis Hillel, Birkat HaMazon does not require a cup of wine. Beis Hillel would hold, and he explains what is the machloket. The machloket, the argument is in a situation where you did not drink any wine during the meal. And not only you didn't drink any wine during the meal, you didn't drink any liquid during the meal. And we have a discussion, is in order, the obligation of Birkat HaMazon, when you have to say grace after the meal and you have to say Birkat HaMazon, you have to bench after the meal, is that biblical obligation? We know there's an obligation, it says, Kakosav Achalta V'Savatu V'Rachta. The Torah says you eat, you're satiated, and you say a blessing. And when we say we're eating, we're referring to bread. You have bread, and you're satiated. But the question is, do you also need to have drinks during the meal? You have to have a liquid during the meal in order for you to have the biblical obligation of Birkat HaMazon. So there's an opinion we had in the Gemara earlier of Rav Meir. Rav Meir said in the Gemara, V'achalta v'savata uveirachta. He says savata, when the Torah says being satiated, is referring to you have to have drink. You have to, only the obligation that the Torah obligated you to go ahead and say Birkat HaMazon, according to this opinion, is only if you drank. If you did not drink at the meal, the guy goes in and only eats salad at the meal. You hear the case, everybody? He just had bread, no water, no nothing. Is there a biblical obligation to say Birkat HaMazon in such a case? Or there's only a rabbinic obligation? So he holds, Beis Shammai holds, Rav Meir holds that there's no biblical obligation if you did not have liquid during the meal. So therefore, Beis Shammai, why is Beis Shammai telling you drink the wine during the meal? Why doesn't Beis Shammai say save the wine for Birkat HaMazon? Even if you hold, you don't need, let's say you hold, you don't need a cup of wine for Birkat HaMazon. But isn't it nice? I mean, wouldn't it be ideal? So why is Beis Shammai saying drink the wine, don't have to put it away for Birkat HaMazon? So the reason is there's some other factor that's playing a role here. What's playing a role here is Beis Shammai holds that you should bring yourself into the biblical obligation of Birkat HaMazon. Like we go ahead and we buy a pair of tzitzit. The Torah's obligation of tzitzit is when you have a four-cornered garment, you have to put on tzitzit. We go to the store to buy a four-cornered garment to put on tzitzit so we should fill the mitzvah of tzitzit. So Beis Shammai wants you to bring you into this obligation of Birkat HaMazon. And therefore, Beis Shammai says you should drink the wine during the meal in order that you will be satiated. And as a result of being satiated, then you will go ahead and have a biblical obligation of Birkat HaMazon. What Beit Hillel says is you don't need to drink the wine during the meal in order for you to have a biblical obligation of Birkat HaMazon. You can have a biblical obligation of Birkat HaMazon by just eating the bread and being satiated full from the bread. Meaning if you have just an ounce of bread, you're not satiated from bread. If you have, let's say, a nice meal like a Friday night meal, or anytime you have a lot of bread, then you'll be full, you're really filled up from the bread. Then you have a biblical obligation, even though if you didn't have any liquid during the meal. So therefore, you do not need to drink wine during the meal or any liquid during the meal in order to be obligated Birkat HaMazon. So according to this, so Beis Hillel, the fact that Beis Hillel says you could put the wine for the end of the meal and use it for Birkat HaMazon might not even indicate you need a cup of wine for Birkat HaMazon. It's just that he's indicating you do not need to make sure to have liquid during the meal. This is the opinion of the Raj. Okay, now we're in the next Gemara. Beis Shammai Omer. Now, this next Gemara, we're going to do a little intro today because we're going to get into the Gemara tomorrow. This is a more difficult technical piece. It deals with Tumah and Taira. It deals with contamination and so on and so forth. And it has to do with the meal. It has to do with what is the proper protocol of when it's time to say kiddush, let's say Friday night. And you're gonna have kiddush, and you're gonna also have bread. What is the right order of things? Should you go ahead and first wash your hands, and then say the kiddush, and then say hamotzi? Or should you go ahead and say kiddush, and then wash your hands, and then say hamotzi? As we all know, the more common custom is, we say kiddush, we wash our hands, and then we say hamotzi. You should know there are some German Jews. They have a custom, they wash their hands, they say kiddush, and I think they say hamotzi. They wash their hands earlier, but we'll see more about that. So we had a machloket in our Mishnah. What is the order? That's now on the first wide line on Nun Beis Amud Beis on 52a. We had a machloket in our Mishnah. If you look back, we had Beis Shammai, which is called the Mishnah is on Nun Aleph Amud Beis. It's the second halacha in the Mishnah. 3 lines into the Mishnah. Beis Shammai Omrim. Beis Shammai says Notlim liyadayim. Beis Shammai says the first thing you need to do, it's time to say kiddush. You have to wash your hands first. Notlim yadayim. You have to wash your hands. V'achakach mozgim esakos. And then you go ahead and you pour the wine and you dilute it with the water, and then you make kiddush. You have to make sure that your hands are washed. You have to
in your backpack because you will forget it.
You have to wash your hands. That's the opinion of Beis Shammai.
Put it in your backpack.
It's my bottle.
And Beis
Oh, this is not your bottle.
Hillel says, Beis Hillel says no. You first goes past the coast. Beis Hillel says you go ahead. Good morning, everybody. You want to say hello to Yosef's family? Good morning, everybody. Beis Hillel says, what does Beis Hillel say?
Sorry, Rabbi.
No problem with it. Good to hear voices. People are alive and kicking, doing good things, they hope. Right?
Yeah. First day of school.
Beis Hillel says you first got to go ahead. You first make the kiddush, and then you go ahead, and you wash. And then after you make kiddush, then you wash your hands, and then you say hamotzi. That's what it says in our Mishnah. What we're going to do tomorrow, we're going to continue tomorrow, is trying to. The Gemara is going to explain what is the machloket, what is the driving force between these two opinions, and whether you're supposed to go ahead and wash your hands first before you have the cup of wine, or have the cup of wine and have the wash your hands right before you do hamotzi. We're gonna right. We do the because we follow Beit Hillel. Beit Hillel, as you know, generally the law generally follows Beit Hillel. And Beit Hillel's opinion was that you first say the kiddush and then you wash your hands before the bread. You want to keep the washing right before you do the bread. You don't want such, but that's one reason we're going to see in the Gemara that we don't want a large interruption between the washing of the hands and the hamotzi. So if you're going to go ahead and say wash your hands and then say kiddush and then say the hamotzi, so that's a nice interruption. And that's
Rabbi, it's 7 o'clock, Rabbi.
What do you say?
It's 7 o'clock, just to remind you.
Yes. The minyan doesn't have too many people here yet, so therefore they didn't start yet. We're waiting. Good morning, Sammy. Good morning.
Can I ask Akiva if he can? I'm probably going to be disconnected because I'm driving through not a zone of reception. If I can text message him, he can connect me when I text message him.
Yeah, Akiva, you hear what he's saying?
I'll keep my eye on my phone.
Yeah, he'll keep an eye.
On my phone, I'm not looking at my phone. I'm praying. But
Yeah, he's gonna try to keep an eye on it.
Thank you.
Welcome.
and
Thank you.
Just on mute and make noise, and I will hear it. If I hear it, I'll just unmute it.
Yeah, I text message you. Okay.
Yeah, I'll text message. Yes. Yeah.
Okay.
I will text.
Just in case I don't see the text, unmute yourself and just make noise, and I'll hear you.
Yeah, but they're not gonna want the noise. You said they're not gonna want the show. Not gonna have to. Okay. Okay. So meanwhile, they didn't start yet. So we'll just say another point here.
I'll keep an eye on it.
Fine. Okay. Okay. Very good. So we have regarding washing the hands before we do hamotzi. Right. The question is, why do we wash our hands before we do hamotzi? Before we have bread, right? The reason for that. Dine netilat yadayim l'suda. So take out the halacha. Netilat yadayim l'suda, and it says like this: when you're coming to eat bread, you're gonna say hamotzi. You wash your hands, even though you don't know that the hands have become contaminated. You have to wash your hands. Now, the Chavetz Chaim says there's two reasons for the washing of the hands. One reason is because of cleanliness and holiness. Because of cleanliness and holiness, you have to wash your hands. We want your hand. You're gonna have bread, and it's very important to be clean. Cleanliness is a very important thing, and holiness, and therefore we have to wash our hands because we need to be clean. That's one reason. A second reason is because of the issue of truma. Because a person's hands, people's hands are always touching different things. Because they're touching different things, and sometimes they touch things that are not so clean. So the rabbis placed a status of tumah, of contamination, on the hands. They considered the hands tameh. A person's hands are considered tameh, and therefore, and in the time when you had the when you had truma, when you had the truma that would go to the kohen, you would have to rabbinically wash your hands before you handle the truma, because okay, they're about to start. Okay, have a great day, Yosef and Tzaddik, and to all your whole family should have a great day. Okay, they're starting now.
Okay. Akiva will.
Yeah, we're gonna close it. We're gonna.
Okay.
Tell me to close it. Tell me to close it.
Oh, you want to stop the YouTube?
Yeah.
Oh, no, you don't need to close.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.